Discussions, oftentimes when we hear that conflicting information, a lot of people have that impulse to reject that information and to try and double down on those exact beliefs because of those exact emotions that we oftentimes have when discussing with people. So what we want to do with you all today and this morning is work through this effect and work on some ways that we can overcome those backfires that we have when discussing with people. On your tables, you should have a worksheet and a one-pager just giving more information about our organization and also something that you can use to follow along. I want you all to think of an issue that you all like to talk about in your lives. I want you all to think of that issue, and I want you to think of some people in your life who may disagree with you on that matter. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's someone in your community who you've engaged with. It might even be a random stranger on the internet who's just driving you crazy. But I want you to think of that issue you like to talk about. Think of someone who disagrees with you on that issue. And from there, we're going to work on some different things that you can work through and work on to communicate that message and to communicate that issue that you're passionate about. So the question is when you're thinking about this issue and you're thinking about this person that's disagreed with you, one of the questions you might be asking is why is it that when I give this information, it completely backfires? Why does that happen? And it's a question that it's important to understand because there's a ton of different examples and there's a ton of different ways that we can delve into this. There's a ton of reasons why this backfire occurs. And there's a ton of different aspects to it. Generally speaking, when it comes to the backfire effect, there are three types of backfires that we see amongst individuals when we're talking with them. The first type of backfire is what's known as familiarity backfire. The tendency a lot of us have as individuals is to get into echo chambers. And as a result of getting in those echo chambers, we hear a lot of the same talking points, we hear a lot of the same facts, we hear a lot of the same evidence. And as a result of that, through those habits we've developed, and through those habits the individual you disagree with has developed, it's very common for them to hear those pieces of evidence, but then when confronted with conflicting evidence, it may not even necessarily be that they disagree with you, it's just not something that they've heard on a common level. And as a result of that, it's about getting that familiarity with those talking points and familiarity with that evidence. That's something that's a misconception, that when someone doubles down, sometimes it's not even that they disagree, it's that they just haven't heard it as much as they've heard a lot of the other things in their lives. And this is a phenomenon that we've seen across the board when discussing with individuals, and it's something that marketers know extremely well. Because what happens is in a lot of situations, if someone hears something enough, they perceive it as fact, and they perceive it as truth. It's what's known as the illusory truth effect. For anyone familiar with a man named Edward Bernays, he's the founder of modern-day propaganda, essentially. He wrote a book in 1928 called Propaganda, talking about all of the different communication tricks that people can use and all of the different levels in which you can persuade an individual. And the biggest key that he found working in various different companies, whether it was Big Tobacco or any other company that he was contracted out to, he found that if you repeated something enough, even if it wasn't true, even if it was completely false, if you repeated it enough, people would perceive it to be a fact. And we see this all the time. We see all kinds of lines being repeated. You probably are thinking of one right now, of lines you hear from the media or lines you hear from society that just get repeated so much that people stop pushing back on it because it's just been perceived to be a fact and a truth. For example, I want to do a thought experiment in this room. How many people have heard the phrase, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks"? Yeah, just about everybody. You know what's interesting is that's actually not true. It's not true. In fact, you can teach an old dog new tricks. It might be a little bit more difficult, might be a little bit more challenging, but you absolutely can. But here's the funny part, is in debunking this claim, I repeated the claim. And I would not be surprised as if some people in this room 3 weeks later, you're talking with your friends and you just go, well, I guess you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Because that's how familiarity backfire works in a lot of cases. We hear something repeated so often that we perceive it to be a fact, and we not necessarily reject, but we forget about some of the contradictory points that are being made in our discussion. There's a ton of different examples. Another one that I can think of off the top of my head, how many of you have heard the phrase, if you touch a toad, you get warts? Yeah, that's not true. It's clinically not proven that you do that. And yet, for whatever reason, when we see a toad, the impulse is, well, don't touch it, you're going to get warts. But think about it this way. Those are just two examples I've given in the animal kingdom, not even in the political realm of things, of phrases that we hear all of the time, and we simply just repeat them back because we've heard them so many times. Well, it has to be true if we've heard it on this level in so many different occasions. And the key is understanding when someone has been in a situation where they've simply heard a phrase or a talking point or a piece of evidence so many times that you need to get them more exposure to a different vantage point and a different point of view. I could go on all day of all kinds of different things that have been repeated over and over again. But you're probably wondering to yourself, how does this play out in conversation? How does this play out? How do we see this operate in motion when I'm engaging with an individual or when I'm talking with someone? And to illustrate what it can look like, here's a satirical example from the movie Idiocracy. If anyone's seen the movie Idiocracy, it's the scene where the smartest man in the world is trying to explain to his cabinet that they need to use water to grow plants instead of an electrolyte drink known as Brondo.
For the last time, I'm pretty sure what's killing the crops is this Brondo stuff.
The Brondo's got what plants crave. It's got electrolytes.
So wait a minute. What you're saying is that you want us to put water on the crops?
Yes.
Water? Like out the toilet?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be out of the toilet, but yeah, that's the idea.
But Brondo's got what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes.
Okay, look. The plants aren't growing, so I'm pretty sure that the Brondo's not working. Now, I'm no botanist, but I do know that if you put water on plants, they grow.
Oh, well, I've never seen no plants grow out of no toilet.
Hey, that's good. You sure you ain't the smartest guy in the world?
Yeah. So let's go back.
Okay, look, you want to solve this problem. I want to get my pardon, so why don't we just try it, okay? And not worry about what plants crave.
Brondo's got what plants crave.
Yeah, it's got electrolytes.
What are electrolytes? Do you even know?
It's what they use to make Brondo.
Yeah, but why did they use them to make Brondo?
Because Brondo...
For the last...
How many people, when you're conversing with people, how many times does it feel like that, where you're trying to get through and they just keep repeating the same things? How many people could relate to that situation right there? This is a prime example right here of the familiarity backfire effect in a fictional example. In this instance, those people had heard the phrase, Brondo's got what plants crave, so many times that they couldn't even think or fathom the idea of something else being the solution to the problem. In fact, the only things that they had heard repeated over and over again were Brondo's got what plants crave and water comes out of a toilet. And as a result, it was hard for that individual to overcome that familiarity backfire effect in that instance. So when engaging with someone in this instance where they've been surrounded by a talking point as many as in a variety of different situations, it's important to remember and help them get that exposure that they need to those different talking points to help them better internalize what it is that you're talking about. Otherwise, what will essentially happen is, well, this is my claim. Well, that's not true. There's this evidence that debunks this. Oh, cool, interesting. 3 weeks later. Well, same claim. They'll say the exact same claim. So keep that in mind. That's one of the different reasons why we see people backfire when we debunk some of the claims that are being made or when we use evidence to discuss a different matter with an individual. That one's one of the easier ones to overcome because it's simply just a matter of familiarity and getting people acclimated. But another type of backfire to really delve into and to really zero in on is this second type of backfire, which is known as overkill backfire. And where familiarity backfire is more so a case of someone being in an echo chamber or hearing a similar talking point over and over again, overkill backfire oftentimes can fall on us as communicators. To illustrate what I mean by that, and to illustrate what I mean by the overkill backfire effect, here's Marty McFly from Back to the Future. Wait.
Hey, guys, you gotta get back in there and finish the dance.
Anyway, the scene that was actually supposed to be shown there was the scene where he does the big guitar solo at the end, and when he's done, the whole crowd just gives him this blank stare. And he goes, well, I guess you guys just aren't ready for that yet, but your kids are gonna love it. And when it comes to communicating, sometimes we're so excited, we're so passionate about a subject matter that we just want to spill our guts out and just tell them everything. But the reality with a lot of people is we got to meet them where they're at. If we're at point B, but they're at point A, We got to make sure that we meet them at point A when we're communicating. Think about it this way. How many of you, when you're watching infomercials and they keep going, but wait, there's more, but wait, there's more, but wait, there's more, but wait, there's more. How many of you are just like, okay, enough. I've had enough. I get it. I've seen the product. I get it. This is too much. That's oftentimes what happens when we utilize the overkill backfire effect, where we give essentially too much information and we overload them in certain different respects and not meet them where they're at in a certain instance. It's the same as I mentioned with Marty McFly when he talks about, well, I guess you're just not ready for that. He goes overboard in that exact situation. And it oftentimes takes these incremental steps of explanation and with talking with people to get them to where they need to be in a given situation. I know for sure there's been a lot of situations in my life where I've been in a restaurant or I've been in a certain situation and someone just comes up to me and as they're speaking to you, the only thing you can think is just, that's too much information, TMI. And that aspect of it and that instance of it is a prime example to illustrate some of the backfirings that we can see within our society. So overkill backfire effect is one oftentimes where an individual has simply just given too much information and that individual has shut down. And as a result of shutting down, they look for a simpler explanation as opposed to what could potentially be the real explanation. So you have familiarity backfire effect, you have overkill backfire effect. And then you have this third type of backfire effect right here, which is known as worldview backfire effect. This one right here is the toughest type of backfire to overcome. Whereas with familiarity backfire effect, it's getting people out of their comfort zones. With overkill backfire effect, it's meeting people where they're at. Worldview backfire effect is an instance where an individual is so convinced with their beliefs that it becomes who they are as a person. And any attempt to question those beliefs, any attempt to debunk those beliefs, any attempt to do any of that, they'll shut down because they see it as a personal attack on themselves, as opposed to what it actually is, a rational discussion. There's a ton of different examples I can think of from this worldview backfire effect aspect. I have a friend of mine in the Navy in San Diego, very conservative individual, and someone set him up on a date with an individual, and on the first date there, he asked a question. He said, so what are you passionate about? What do you like to do? Keep in mind, you can answer thousands of different things with that question. Thousands of different things. The answer she gave, without hesitation, Black Lives Matter. That was the first thing that she said. So clearly, at this point in time, it's very clear in this instance that that's who she sees herself as a person. That's part of her personality. It's part of her worldview. But naturally, my friend, he's not the biggest supporter of that movement, and so he tried arguing with her. He tried asking some questions. He tried debunking it. Needless to say, there was not a second date. She was not open to discussion on this matter, and as a result of that, there was a backfire, because in this situation, this had become a part of her personality. And we see this all the time within our society. Too often, people can get so entrenched in their beliefs that they see it as just who they are as a person. To illustrate another point from a fictional example here, I want to look at this satirical job interview of an individual whose identity in a lot of cases revolves around getting up late in the morning.
Amy, it says you are trained in technology. That's very good. Are you adept at Excel?
No.
PowerPoint?
No.
Publisher?
Not really.
Exactly in what area of technology are you proficient?
Snapchat, Pinterest, Instagram, Vine, Twitter. You know, the big ones.
I'm surprised you didn't say Facebook.
That's for old people, like my parents. That's funny.
Well, Amy, when you're working for me, you have to have those kind of research skills, because I'll send you things for you to comb through and get the answers and send them to me. So for that, you got to be really good at technology.
For stuff like that, no problem. I'll just ask Siri.
You'll just ask Siri?
You know, Siri, tell me this, Siri, find me that. We're all good at getting you the answers.
Tell Siri I want you ready to go at 8 sharp each and every morning.
I don't understand
What don't you understand?
what you just said.
You don't understand be ready to go?
No. You said 8, right?
Yes.
8, like, in the morning 8?
Yes, in the morning.
Yeah, that kind of doesn't work for me. Who gets up at 8?
I do.
I Skype with my French boyfriend in Paris until like 3 in the morning. I don't even get to Starbucks until like 10, where I order my grande chai tea latte, 3 pumps, skim milk, light water, 2% foam, extra hot, but not too hot. So if it's okay, I work best in the morning at 10:45.
Wow. Amy, I don't think we're going to be a good fit.
Why are you so negative? I can sense your hostilities, and right now I am not feeling very safe. I've been here for over 5 minutes, and the only nice thing you have said to me was nice resume, which I typed all night for this meeting with you. You've given me no guidance, no validation, no encouragement, no supervision. Is there an HR director somewhere?
HR director?
Yes, I need to speak to someone. I may have to take off today as a mental health day.
Take the day off. Amy, look at me. You don't work here.
So this is a satirical example. There's always truth in comedy. But in this instance, her entire worldview was revolved around her schedule. Her getting up at 10 in the morning, Skyping her French boyfriend, her Starbucks aspect of her life was clearly very important. So when the interviewer pushed back, hey, we need you in the office at 8 a.m., there was a huge shutdown. There was a huge backfire effect that emerged as a result of it. And this one obviously is the toughest type of form to overcome, but it's important to recognize that when you're engaging with an individual or when you're talking with someone, whether or not they've reached that point where their beliefs essentially epitomize who they are as a person, and treading carefully when engaging with that individual. So we've walked through some different things. You've probably thought in your head, as I've been going through this, some examples of someone in your life who you've had some disagreements with, or some reasons potentially why. We've walked through that why aspect of the backfire effect. But the question you're probably asking yourself is, so how do I overcome this? How do I overcome the backfire effect? Next slide, please. How do I overcome the backfire effect? There's a few different things that we can do, but someone in our organization, it's a colleague of mine named Dwayne Lester, he's done a lot of work on the backfire effect, and a lot of us in our organization have traveled around the country and engaged with individuals on a lot of different fronts to try and understand how the art of persuasion works. And the biggest conclusion my coworker Dwayne Lester came to in his book, Overcoming the Backfire Effect, is he said that persuasion is a process. As much as we would love it for us to be able to convince someone of something within 30 seconds, it takes time. And it is something that it's really about planting seeds. You can't grow a tree overnight. You got to be able to figure out some ways that you can plant seeds in people's heads that help them understand and grow and learn as they go along in life. And we'll go through a few different tactics with this. One of the big things that he's learned, and one of the big things to keep in mind, is that people oftentimes don't argue with their own data. It's something that a mentor of him taught when it came to the matter of the backfire effect, and it's very true. What I've always found to be interesting is when you're discussing something with someone, he would ask a question. If you ask a question, for example, if someone's saying something about a budgetary matter, and you ask the question, well, what percentage of the budget do you think this should be? And they give you that percentage, and you say, well, actually, that percentage is lower than what you perceive it to be. They've effectively set their own data at that point, and now they have to figure out where the discrepancy is and where they're discussing this matter. There's a ton of different examples that we can talk about in the process of persuasion. But two things to keep in mind as we're planting seeds in people's heads is a great example to really look at are trial attorneys. Oftentimes, trial attorneys are the masters at overcoming potential backfire because they understand that to develop a proper case, whether it's as a plaintiff or a prosecutor or as a defense attorney, they understand that there's a process to be had. There's a story to be told. And using stories is a great way to back up facts or claims or evidence that we have because it helps us understand and internalize the life lessons that we see within society around us. One of the best examples I can think of is when it comes to storytelling and when it comes to effective communication, going back to trial attorneys, how many people in this room followed the Kyle Rittenhouse trial? Yeah. Very famous trial. And you think about what happened there, it wasn't just a case of the attorneys just throwing out a bunch of random facts and evidence all at once within a 3-minute opening statement. There was a process behind that. There was effectively 2 conflicting stories that were being told from the evidence that they were given. You had the prosecution that was telling people that Kyle Rittenhouse was a white supremacist who had this illegal gun and was out to get people, and he just came to Wisconsin with a vengeance. And then you had the defense side of it, completely different. But they told the story of an individual who just really cared about his community and was concerned about the direction that the country was going down and wanted to go there to defend the community and to stand up for what he believed in. And as a result of these different stories, the jury was able to comprehend what was going on through what was being unfolded. Each attorney called up a witness, and with each of those witnesses, they told a different story that added towards the facts and evidence that happened. This plays out in real life all the time when it comes to the legislative process, when it comes to engaging with individuals. One of the best examples that I can think of is with our organization and our sister organization, Americans for Prosperity. And we're big believers in the American dream, and we want to show people how that works with a lot of folks. One of the issues we've been really engaged in chapters around the country is one known as occupational licensing. Is anyone familiar with occupational licensing reform? I see a few heads nodding. I see a few hands raising. Originally, one of our biggest fallbacks when it came to messaging is we wanted to just go straight to the data. We would go straight to the data, we'd go to legislators. So we've noticed that in 1952, about 1 in 20 small business owners required a post-secondary education to own a business. Now that number is 1 in 4. And people would sit there and they'd go, okay, 1 in 20, 1 in 4. I see the discrepancy here. But how does this affect me? How does this affect people? And that's when we realized that it's the human impact of these policies that really needs to be brought out to help people understand what's truly at stake on a given issue. And there's been a lot of inspiring stories of people who've overcome some of these regulations. One of the prime examples I can think of is a lady named Melanie Armstrong. She came to the United States and she had an expertise in hair braiding. She wanted to start up her own hair braiding business. And in doing so, she was able to start up this business. She was able to make cash hand over fist, make a huge difference on a lot of people's lives. But then one day, her business was shut down. Her business was shut down by the government because she had not taken a certain amount of hours in a cosmetology course that really didn't have much to do with her area of practice. She was devastated. She just lost her business. She lost her way of living her version of the American dream. But to her credit, she was able to tell her story, to talk about her impact, and to think about the different ways that she could get through to people. And her story is an inspiring one because it's simply someone who just wanted to live her best life. And when people understood that, and when people heard that story, they realized the dangers that happened with some of these occupational licensure laws. And luckily, because of her story and because of her testimony and her ability to humanize the issue, she was able to get her business back. But the fascinating part about this is in her state of Mississippi, before she had seen this reform, there was around 400 hair braiders in the state. After the reform, over 18,000. It's crazy to think. Essentially over 17,000 people benefited from this, but all it took was one person's story, one person's ability to communicate the facts and to communicate the things that were going on and the ways those things impacted her life. And that's what we always need to be thinking of. Behind every fact, behind every piece of data, behind everything that we do, we need to think about what's the story behind this? What's the human impact of what it is that we're talking about? Because that's how we relate to one another, and oftentimes that's how we learn our life lessons. You think about the Bible, and you think about the way it's structured. It's not structured in metadata. It's not structured in peer-reviewed research. It's structured in parables. And it's structured in these parables because Jesus understood that the way we learn our life lessons is through these short stories and through these parables. So think about whenever you're talking about the issue, you've probably thought about an issue you like to talk about, you've thought about something that someone may disagree with you on, and you've thought about potentially why someone disagrees with you on that given issue. But in this instance, I want you to think about some stories that you could potentially tell that better humanize the issue that you're talking about with this individual and help them really understand the human aspect of it. It's what a lot of the greatest communicators do. You think about throughout the course of history, whether it's in politics, marketing, wherever it is, they all are extremely effective at telling stories. So that's one thing I challenge you all to think about, is some different ways that you can tell stories to really bring out that aspect of that issue. But along with telling stories, one thing that my colleague Dwayne Lesser really noticed is that questions oftentimes are the answer. And by really helping them delve into things and really asking as many pointed questions as you can, it helps you really work on that, helps them work on that deductive reasoning aspect and helps them internalize what it is that they're talking about. He mentioned earlier, and we mentioned earlier, that people don't argue with their own data. And when you can ask a series of questions that establish that set of data or establish the common things that you all agree upon, it's a lot easier to really move that discussion forward and help people understand what's going on in that instance. There's a lot of great examples of this, and it's why the best attorneys, they ask a lot of questions. Whether it's in a direct examination or a cross-examination, they're always looking for different ways to pick apart the way that someone's looking at something, but not telling them that they're wrong. A lot of the best communicators, they don't just outright tell someone that they're wrong. They help them work through it in a logical manner. One of the thought experiments that I thought was interesting that he did is, in one instance, he asked the audience a question. He was at a group at George Mason University. And he asked this question. He asked, how many people think that we need to keep guns out of the hands of violent felons? He said, raise your hand if you think we need to keep guns out of the hands of violent felons. Every single person in the room raised their hand. And then he followed up with the question, how many people here think gun control measures work? The audience just kind of sat there and chuckled nervously because they had seen kind of the contradiction in their logic. And they had seen some of the different ways in which you could look at the given issue. It's really fascinating when you think about it. And these types of thought experiments can really help people not only determine their own data, but figure out whether or not there's a logical contradiction in the way that they do things. But at the end of the day, when it comes to being an individual who can break through the backfire effect, the most important aspect is to figure out how you can become that trusted messenger in that person's life. There's really a process that's followed. You think about what leads to trust. How do you build trust with an individual? It boils down to relationships. And it boils down to really getting to that point where you know them enough and they know you enough that they're not out to get you and you're not out to get them, and you can have that discussion in a reasonable manner. That trust aspect is so important, and it's what really allows for the best communicators to reach people, whether it's through establishing their credibility or through that relationship. And the trust factor, we see it all the time, where even in situations where someone calls us and tells us something, we're maybe not as inclined to believe it because we don't trust them at the end of the day. For example, just out of curiosity, how many people in this room have had that robocall about your car's extended warranty? Yeah, we get it all the time. How many people actually answer that? I can't imagine anyone in this room answers that. Because at the end of the day, we don't trust. It's a robocall. There's no trust that's been established in this given situation. And as a result of that, we're not going to listen to what it is that they're going to say. So if you don't have that foundation of trust with that individual, it's extremely difficult to overcome that backfire effect. So think about it in those different manners. When you build the relationships, you build the trust, and once you have trust, it's much easier to plant those seeds. It's much easier to gain that ability to persuade. And remember, persuasion's a process. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that even happens sometimes within the next day. It's why the best politicians don't just talk to someone for 30 seconds and then just leave them alone. There's mailers, there's commercials, there's all kinds of different ways that they attack different angles so people understand what's at stake and what's going on in a given issue or a given part of our society. So with all of this said, and with all of these aspects with the backfire effect, what I challenge you all to do is three things. First, figure out some ways that you can build trust with those people who disagree with you. Figure out those different ways that you can build those relationships, build those trust. Make sure that you get to know them, they get to know you. That's the first aspect. The second thing, as I mentioned, is I want you all to think of some stories that you can use to really humanize that issue, hammer that point, and bring it home so that they understand what's going on in a given area. And the third thing is to think about the questions that you can ask. that really help people understand where they're coming from, what their own data is, and help them analyze the situation in a way that can help them come to a different conclusion. These are the 3 tried and true methods that you can use to overcome that backfire effect that we all see. And it's one of the best ways that the best communicators use to really hammer home a point and to really turn that no into a yes on many different fronts. So thank you all for your time and attention this morning on the backfire effect. I'll be sticking around throughout the day if you got any questions or comments or concerns. On the tables here, we actually have a one-page document for our organization. And we offer a wide variety of different trainings. We have a QR code on it. If you're interested in getting involved or engaged, feel free to scan that QR code. We offer a wide variety of trainings on communication skills, on organizing skills, on messaging skills, and on all kinds of different things across the board. And if you're interested in the book that I mentioned from my colleague Dwayne Lester, you can actually, there's a QR code on that worksheet that I talked about that will give you access to his book, and he walks through all of the different tactics that he uses, all the different tips and tricks, and some of the experiences that he's also had when engaging with people on an issue like the backfire effect. As well as our organization with the Grassroots Leadership Academy, we also have our sister organization, Americans for Prosperity. We have a table outside there with all kinds of people willing to engage. If you have any questions about some of the projects that we're working on, some of the ways that we're trying to help people live their version of the American dream, I encourage you all to visit them, chat with them, and figure out some different ways that you can get involved. Because at the end of the day, that aspect of getting involved is so important to building that trust, building those bonds, and really being an effective communicator within our society. So thank you all for your time and attention this morning. I'm Mike Sylvester. Hope to see you around. Thank you very much.